Coming up, another SEC school is apparently jumping into the mix for the hot transfer quarterback name, and an SEC analyst offers a tough evaluation of Kirby Smart. It's all on the way next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We're glad you're with us as we talk about the SEC for the next 60 minutes. And let me just say off the top of the show here, I've done shows earlier today. Some of our network of shows have taken place. There's been a little bit of an issue with the Facebook comments here. I'm going to pull these up. We'll see if they're working. The show should work fine on Facebook. You should be able to see it. I don't know that there's the Facebook comments. They seem to be working fine now.
Mine just disappeared. So.
Okay, so yours disappeared. We'll see if mine works. If not, I may have to do YouTube and Twitter comments here on the screen and do Facebook comments here off the phone here, which I'm sure I'll be great at. I'm sure I'll just juggle that like a magician. But one way or another, we'll see if we can make sure we get all the comments read and have a great time on the show today. In fact, let's dive into the action here. Item number one on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. We talked a lot yesterday about former now Ohio State quarterback Joe Burrow, who announced his decision to transfer from that program because he's not expected to be the starting quarterback. And on our program, we kind of got into this from the angle of, is this a player the Florida Gators would be in discussion with? We mentioned that over the course of the last couple of months. That seemed most relevant. But now there is some thought here that it's another SEC team that could also be in the mix for the transfer quarterback from Ohio State, and that's LSU. Surprising here based on what Ed Orgeron has said in the past. We'll remind you of that in a moment. But let me show you some of the latest sort of conversation about this on the internet. I'll start with Andy Staples, the reporter and columnist from Sports Illustrated, who will let us know that LSU's already gotten permission to speak to Burrow here. Here is Staples on Twitter saying that LSU and Cincinnati have been granted permission to contact Ohio State quarterback Joe Burrow, who announced his plans to transfer earlier today. One of our Land of 10 colleagues also on social media letting us know that right now LSU is one of the favorites, at least one of, the way we think of a recruit having favorites. LSU is also one of his favorites as well. It's from Ryan Donnelly, who works for our sister site, land10.com, who says it's the first three schools on the list from below who are thought to be the major contenders here. That's Florida, we mentioned yesterday, and I'll speak about more later on the program. LSU, who we're talking about right now, and also Nebraska, who we mentioned yesterday. Donnelly says it's an evaluation process that's going to occur for other programs moving forward here. So, Mike, I ask you, push aside Florida here for a moment. We'll deal with them and the chances that maybe Nebraska is the favorite here. How about LSU? According to Andy Staples being given permission, according to Ryan Donnelly from Land of 10 being one of the favorites. I thought Ed Orgeron said they had a quarterback.
No, I know.
What is going on here?
I know that's probably the angle a lot of people are going to take. I mean, I don't want to say sold a bill of goods, but Ed Orgeron went out of his way to say, we've got our quarterback in this room. The guy's here. And, we weren't sure who he was pointing to at the time, but you've seen the battle play out. You've seen Miles Brennan kind of take a hold of things. You've seen Justin McMillan and Lowell Narcisse bounce back and forth in that position of kind of being runner-up. But I have absolutely no problem with LSU going after Joe Burrows. I hope that Joe Burrows lands in the SEC, and I hope that he makes, whether that be LSU or Florida, I hope he makes one of these teams better, because I think Ed Orgeron looks at it and says, you know what? There's a chance we have a B-graded offense right here. Miles Brennan could go out there and give us a B-graded offense. I think with Joe Burrows in that lineup, he automatically upgrades the quarterback position and gives you the opportunity to get that A lineup, that A-plus lineup, and that offense on the field for LSU.
So on Facebook, some people are agreeing with you, and I'm going to look, like a dork here reading off my phone, but I got to nonetheless. Dwayne Rourke says, I'd love to see the Tigers land him. Dwayne, by the way, is an Arkansas fan, so that's a somewhat interesting comment. Christy Hardy says this could be a great thing for LSU. Bobby J. Smith says he's going to probably end up at a Youngstown State. So people already weighing in on that on the comment section there on Facebook Live. And, I can't get out of my mind what Ed Orgeron had said about this kind of stuff in the past.
Cliff Nelson can't get over it either.
Okay, so we'll read what the YouTube commenters are saying here in a moment. But for those of you who don't remember, going back to the very beginning of spring, when it was Miles Brennan, when it's Lowell Narcisse, when it's Justin McMillan, when it's those three guys competing as LSU quarterback for the LSU job, Orgeron at the time was very high on that trio. Here is what he said then.
Quarterback. Somebody's got to step up. That's been the question of LSU around here for a long time. And we feel like we have three outstanding quarterbacks. I feel like I got a great quarterback coach in Steve Ensming, a great offensive coordinator. I think it's finally going to happen. I see talent in all these three guys. I believe in them. I do believe that we're finally going to have the quarterback that LSU's been looking for a long time.
So here's my problem here. I don't disagree with you when you say that Joe Burrow would make LSU better. He probably would. But this whole ordeal makes me lose whatever sliver of confidence I still had in Ed Orgeron. That's all out the window now because here is Orgeron's track record. You know, he's praising Matt Canada a year ago, and then like the second or third game of the year, he's already turning his back on him. That relationship became so irreparable that you had to move on to a Steve Ensminger. Now Ensminger's his guy, and he's going to bring the offense here in the 21st century. And, you know, right there, he's touting these three quarterbacks of, hey, the quarterback the LSU fans have been waiting for a long time, he's right there in that room. But now we're adding another quarterback into that room. Either Orgeron was wrong when he said that, or he was lying when he said that, or he just doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in the middle probably. Listen, it's like I said, I have no problem with Ed Orgeron going after Joe Burrow, but you do point to it and say, well, how much can we really trust what this guy's saying? And I think that's been the thing with Ed Orgeron all along, right? He's not a defensive guy. He's not an offensive guy. He's a CEO, head coach, almost a salesman of that program, saying we're going to get this right, we're going to get that right, we're going to get these recruits, and we're going to do everything possible. So I do think that there is part of the LSU fan base that probably looks at this and says, when are we going to have a homegrown quarterback, right? When are we going to get a quarterback that we recruited and that we signed and that we've had come up through the system to actually be good here? Because Danny Etling, Purdue transfer, going all the way back to Mettenberger, transfer. It's been one after the other at LSU. But I get the sense from LSU fans, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong, and I know that you will, that they're ready for someone to be good. Doesn't matter where he comes from.
I understand that, but you know, for LSU, like you mentioned, it's two things here. This is a guy that if he wins the starting job is that quarterback again for 2019, which only takes LSU maybe out of the mix for an elite, like a Grant Gunnell style 2019 quarterback recruit. This would seem to push LSU farther away from that direction. And I can't help but go back to kind of where I've been on this sort of subject before of how many transfer players does LSU need to field a team? Because that does not speak well of Ed Orgeron, who has had a full year on the job, was an interim coach handling the recruiting cycle then. You know, the fact that LSU needs transfer defensive tackle, transfer wide receiver, try to transfer running back, trying now for transfer quarterback. I mean, that's like 4 starting positions that either would have potentially been filled or could be filled by transfers, and I'm probably even leaving somebody out here.
Terrace Marshall, the cornerback at
Stanford. The Stanford defensive back, that's right. I mean, how many transfers do you have to bring in? Terrence Alexander, by the way, but I know that's a great addition to mention in that conversation. How many transfers you got to bring in?
Well, I think this is where you're at, and I think that's actually a plus side for Ed Orgeron right now. I think how many times do we talk about roster management? We praise Jeremy Pruitt for doing it. We praise other coaches, roster management, find somebody to fill the holes, find somebody to fill the gaps. So I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with guys transferring in. The only problem I have with Ed Orgeron is that he did say our quarterback is in this room. We're going to be very good at the quarterback position, all those things. I do have to point out, though, that the one thing that is a little bit more of a head scratch for me, what did I say yesterday about Florida? Do you want to bring somebody in? Do you want to muddy the waters in that quarterback competition? And I said, you know what? This is fine at Florida because Joe Burrow knows that system. He knows that offense, right? You plug in from Ohio State, from Urban Meyer to Dan Mullen. It's not that way at LSU. It's not that simple. You're going to have to get him very up to speed, very fast if he's going to be a part of this team this year.
On Facebook, Mark Chambers says, who wouldn't want a quarterback to boost the team? On YouTube, Shannon Burgess says, BA, we're to bring in as many transfers as we want. I don't fault you for bringing in transfers. I think they make the team better, and I don't disagree with the commenter over here on Facebook a moment ago who said, Mark Chambers, who said, a quarterback has a chance to boost the team. I don't fault that. It just makes me think that Ed Orgeron was either lying or just, doesn't know what he's talking about when he was praising the quarterbacks he already had. This is one of those deals where if you get him and he goes on to be a very good quarterback, that's great. But what if he chooses Florida because of, as somebody in the comment section mentioned a moment ago, the Mullen-Meyer connection here, similar offenses. What if this guy chooses Florida over LSU or chooses Nebraska? Now it makes Ed Orgeron look terrible because all of a sudden now he's invalidated whatever faith and confidence he tried to show in his 3 quarterbacks before. He's invalidated a lot of that.
Yeah, no, I think that for the most part, I think Cliff Nelson definitely agrees with you that, why is he saying this? And he goes on to say that my dream was for Canada to be there with Narcisse. True dual threat. All I can say now is air raid with Brennan. But there is, Tyler Mann, I don't care where he comes from. I just want our quarterback to be good. Shannon Burgess just wants someone to be good. I do not care where he comes from. So it is a little bit of a mixed bag with the LSU fans. And I understand where that comes from because Orgeron does leave you asking a ton of questions about how much does Ed Orgeron really have control over what he's seeing in this program?
So last point for me on this subject. You know, we left the spring actually thinking that the LSU quarterback race that was maybe supposed to be whittled down to 2, it's a lot easier to decide between 2 things. Do you want a hamburger or a hot dog? And it is 3 things.
Right.
You want a hamburger, a hot dog, or a chicken sandwich. Those, just, you know, multiple choices make decisions tougher. After the spring, we were left with still 3 quarterbacks to evaluate for LSU. Over the course of a summer practice, you can't effectively evaluate 4 guys at the same time. Now, maybe behind the scenes, one of those 3 quarterbacks between McMillan, Narcisse, and Brennan aren't truly that involved in the starting quarterback chase. But for the life of me, at this point in time, I'm not sure which is which because they all 3 seem to have different moments. Evaluating between 4 options in a brief window of time to get ready for Miami, which is a real living, breathing opponent, that is a tough deal. That's a tough deal.
Yeah, I'm not going to go too far down this road because we are going to get into it from the Florida angle later on in the show. But I do very much so love the way Dan Mullen has handled this as opposed to what Ed Orgeron has done. Right? Dan Mullen saying, "Hey, listen, you know, we don't want to muddy the waters. We got talent on campus because there is always a chance. Listen, you saw Ohio on that list. Joe Burrow's dad's a defensive coordinator at Ohio, so there's always the chance that you choose Nebraska, you choose Ohio, and they don't end up there. And all of a sudden, Ed Orgeron's sitting there looking, you know, like, hey, maybe I didn't love these quarterbacks.
98 Sports Talk, I don't appreciate this, but I'm going to read the comment nonetheless on YouTube. Says, hey, remember when BA called the LSU quarterback competition? I do think I closed the book, much like Dan Rather on election night. This one's done. Wrap it up. Put a bow on it. Stick it under the bed.
Yeah, this one's
Miles
over with.
Brennan's the LSU quarterback.
That first spring scrimmage, we were like, boy, this one's over with right here. Not so much. That
No,
book's not
maybe
closed.
maybe not. Maybe this chase is expanding here as we get towards the summer. Item number 2 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I find this fascinating. This is not the conversation I thought we'd be having here during the offseason about Georgia. It really all goes back to some audio we played yesterday. Brad Edwards, who I think of as a pretty smart ESPN college football analyst, was on with Ryan Fowler to talk about Alabama. And we played that audio yesterday, but in the midst of that conversation, the subject of Georgia comes up. And Brad Edwards expressed some skepticism to Ryan Fowler, the host of the Alabama podcast here on SEC Country, about Georgia making a decision right now to give a contract worth $7 million a year to Kirby Smart, saying Georgia was really under no pressure to do this because it's not like Smart was about to leave for another job. But then on the subject of pressure, sort of pivoted back to Kirby Smart, suggesting that this contract puts a lot more pressure on Smart to really win a national championship and win one soon. Here is how Brad Edwards, the ESPN analyst, explained with SEC Country.
I think Kirby needs to win a national championship in the next 2 or 3 years in order to keep this going. I'm not saying it completely falls apart if he doesn't, but right now he's benefiting from a lot of good publicity because people are making the Saban comparisons, and they're saying, look what he's done. He's come in, had a lot of success in year 2. He's already tearing it up on the recruiting trail, and all that stuff through 2 years matches up. He's got to continue to recruit at that top 3 level every single year. But more importantly, he's got to win a national championship soon in order for those comparisons to continue.
Carlos Cardozo in the Facebook comment section, which if you're just joining us, I have to read from my phone today.
Yeah, let's reset that for a second because I do see a lot of comments in the Facebook comment section when it did show up. A lot of people asking questions. That's not us. That is Facebook that's messing up with the comment section. So BA's reading.
Yeah, so I'm trying to toggle back and forth here. In fact, even poor Mike with his superstar isolation camera, my phone's even showing up in there. Carlos Cardozo in the Facebook comment section says Georgia plays very well with a chip on its shoulder. Bring on all the negative talk. And so I guess to Carlos's point here in the Facebook comment section, I'm a little bit surprised by the negative talk. Brad Edwards is a guy that I think is a smart analyst. I typically like his perspective on college football, but the idea that you're even talking about what happens if Georgia doesn't win a national championship seems misplaced given what we've just seen. Obviously, virtually any coach in the SEC, if you go 2 or 3 years without winning at a really high level, you're going to be put in the hot seat. But as far as the Saban-Smart comparison goes, through 2 years, Georgia's actually outpacing what Nick Saban did at Alabama in his first 2 years. Saban won the West in year 2. Kirby Smart won the SEC. There was no college football playoff back in 2008, but Georgia goes on the Rose Bowl and beats a national championship team caliber of Oklahoma, which very easily could have won the entire thing. So right now, there's very little evidence to suggest that Georgia won't keep building. No guarantee that it will, but to even suggest, he better do it quick or look out. why would that even be a relevant sort of addendum to this discussion at the moment?
Yeah, I like the way you phrased the question to me on Dog Nation today when I joined you as a guest. You said, is this warranted and is this fair? And my point when I answered that question was, no, it's not warranted. It's not warranted at all. I don't see it playing out that way. I think that Kirby Smart checks off all the boxes. He's been great in-game management. He's done great at developing players for the NFL, and he's done great, more than great at recruiting. But is it fair to ask these questions? I think that's kind of a different angle. I think when you go back and look at recent history of national title contenders, listen, you can go back and look at Mark Helfrich up at Oregon. You can look at Les Miles. You can look at Gene Chizik. You can even look at Brian Kelly that was in. Do I think Kirby Smart belongs in that category? Absolutely not. I think that he's proven on the field and on the recruiting trail that he is at a different level than some of those guys. But I do think there was a point in time where you have to prove that you can get back to that every single year. You have to prove that you can develop the players that you've brought in, not so much the previous regime. And I think with the talent really being top heavy on last year's team, when you look at the running backs, when you look at the defense, when you look at the pass rushers, that's a fair argument. But I don't think it's warranted, and I definitely don't think Kirby Smart belongs in that category.
Cameron Merrill says on YouTube, to say that Kirby's shine only comes from Saban is utter nonsense. I have to agree that I kind of think that's true, that at a certain point it almost becomes tiresome to keep bringing back up the Saban comparison. The fact of the matter is Kirby has done, I believe, Mike, plenty to distinguish himself from Saban in the school where he used to work, whether it be the recruits that Kirby got for the class of 2018 that Alabama wanted, did not get. The fact that Alabama did not win the SEC for 2018, Georgia did. And yes, I know Alabama's the reigning national champion, but there was a trophy given out and Alabama wasn't qualified to win it. Georgia was. I mean, there is some work distinguishing Kirby individually, the Georgia program collectively, apart from Alabama and Nick Saban, that makes this sort of thing of he only got $7 million because he used to work for Nick Saban. Frankly, that becomes tiresome at certain points.
Listen, there's some commenters on the YouTube page. Cliff Nelson says, let's see how Smart and UGA handle its first year being the hunted and not the hunter. As Saban has mastered that, your turn, Kirby. Cameron Mirror says, I agree with that, Cliff. Bo Molinari, I agree, Cliff. You're getting thumbs up. You're getting a lot of people that do agree with that sentiment. And so I do think that's kind of the angle that we hear Brad Edwards coming from. I don't expect Kirby Smart to be in that category, but I understand what he's saying is it's different when you turn that corner and your guys come in and you have to keep that level. When coaches leave, when players start to transfer, I understand that. Do I think he'll be a part of that? Absolutely not.
Jazz Hatcher on Facebook says, and by the way, Mike Johnson's daddy on YouTube says, I'm holding this phone like a grandfather, trying to. The older I get, it does get a little harder to see close up. I will admit that. Nonetheless, Jazz Hatcher says, Saban built Bama from nothing. Kirby inherited a great team. You can't use Kirby and Nick in the same sentence. You also can't say that Georgia circa 2015 before Kirby got there was a great team, because if we go back to 2015, I doubt that's what you, maybe an Alabama fan, were saying about that Georgia team that went 9-3 and finished unranked. I mean, let's not revisit history here too much. When Kirby got to Georgia, they hadn't won an SEC championship in 10 full seasons. Or I guess it's really been 11 seasons. Whereas when Saban got to Alabama in 2007, they'd won the SEC as recently as, what, 2000?
99,
which is,
something like that.
So, which is, a little less of a time period since Georgia won the deal. But nonetheless, Brad Edwards went on with Ryan Fowler on the SEC Country Alabama podcast yesterday to really put even more of a time frame on it, referencing Justin Fields saying, by the time this young man leaves Athens, that trophy better be in the trophy case.
If you look at the quarterback he just signed, Fields, if that kid leaves Georgia without them having won a national championship, whether it's him as the quarterback or Fromm, then I think that the momentum is going to start to slip for Georgia. They could end up being a top 10 team every year, but at some point you kind of become what Texas was under Mac Brown, where you just can't get over the Oklahoma hump, but you're beating everybody else. In other words, they'd be a little bit better than they were under Mark Richt, but they still wouldn't be where they think they need to be. So I do think that there's pressure, maybe not this coming season, but I do think in the next 2 or 3 years, if Georgia doesn't win a national championship, people are going to start to say, yeah, you know what, Kirby's a good coach, but he's not the next Saban.
So I, for the most part, agree with what he's saying here, that, right, yes, if Fields leaves, and over the course of this, what would be about a 4-year period, when you have both Fromm and Fields on the roster at the same time, if Georgia hasn't won a national championship by the time that's over, that would obviously be the kind of thing that would be a huge ding on Kirby Smart. But why are we assuming that Georgia could even be trending in that sort of Texas direction of sort of major power that sort of lies dormant and doesn't achieve everything it can? If anything, Kirby Smart blew the lid off that expectation for Georgia with what he did last year, getting Georgia the college football playoff. Not every single one of these appearances in the playoff ends up being, a real big, ramp up to other performances here. But that comparison between the perennially underachieving Texas and Georgia just seems misplaced. This seems to be a guy who, and once again, Brad Edwards is an analyst who I have liked in the past, and I'll like him in the future. On this, though, he is clinging to a past of underachieving Georgia, led by the modest, and mild-mannered Mark Richt, and that is not what Kirby Smart seems to be doing in Georgia right now.
I agree with you. I'll push back, though, just for argument's sake, and say, listen, this could end up being a Les Miles situation, right? I think that's kind of a fair comparison at this point, where you have Les Miles. He takes over for Nick Saban. He wins a national title in 2007. He's getting all the recruits in the world. In 2011, LSU, one of the most star-studded teams ever, right? All these NFL draft picks, but he couldn't get over the hump. I think that's what Brad Edwards is alluding to. Now, like I said, I've been really impressed with Kirby Smart's in-game management. I've been impressed with him to get his players to play at a consistent level throughout the season, especially against lesser opponents. But there is always the chance that does happen. Until it's done, I know that as Georgia fans, you guys are going to always err on the side of, we really love Kirby Smart, and I do too, and I'll err on that side with you. But I don't think it's already written in stone to say, you know what, within the next 5 years it's a national title.
What I would say, though, is that the evidence of it, being a great build-up towards a national championship and sort of stopping short of that, you don't have any more evidence on one side or the other here.
Agreed. Agreed.
It would be wrong for me to make the leap of, within 3 years, Kirby Smart's definitely going to win a national championship. If you'll notice, that's not what I'm saying here. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen. I won't make that promise for anybody. But it's also wrong to assume that it's more likely to be a part of that Mark Richt trajectory. If anything, give Georgia credit. That's the reason why they made the coaching change.
Agreed.
They were tired of that brand and that label being attached to the program. And one more quick point, if you don't mind. As far as the comparison to Nick Saban goes, I made this point on Dog Nation Daily this morning, that for me this is a lot like Bill Belichick, who's universally viewed now as the top coach in the NFL. But there was a time, going back to the past, when Belichick first became, a head coach, that he was thought of as a Bill Parcells disciple, the great legendary NFL coach of the 80s. And that used to be what Belichick was known for. He was the continuation of Bill Parcells' coaching tree. But nobody thinks about Belichick in that regard right now. There is coming a point when you think about Kirby Smart, you don't think about Alabama anymore. You don't think about Nick Saban anymore. You think about what Smart sort of designed as his own niche in the SEC and in college football. And this idea they're always going to be connected to the hip. Bill Belichick's a perfect example of how that's not always true.
No, I agree with you. And listen, Nick Saban's the same way when it comes to Bill Belichick.
That's
Nick
a good
Saban
point.
is a Bill Belichick disciple.
Same coaching tree, yeah.
But I think there is a point where Bill Belichick has won 5, 6 Super Bowls, has been to 8, 9 championship games. I think that's just what we're waiting on. And I don't think Brad Edwards was saying it's not going to happen. I don't think he was saying that but I think there is going to be a lot of pressure with the money being made. And I think it's the same way at Auburn right now too. When you look at the $7.5 million that Malzahn's getting. Listen, we had the same thing go on as NFL players when I was playing in the NFL. It's like, you know what? If you could stay around the $3 million a year range as far as NFL players goes, you'd play 15 years. It wasn't until you got that big contract getting $10 million a year, all of a sudden people looked at you and go, boy, that guy's overpaid. So I think that's the only argument he's trying to make.
Lance White on YouTube says, LOL, you've lost your mind. Kirby had top 10 classes sitting and waiting on him when he got to Georgia. Look at the draft. He didn't sign any of those players. The guys that carried them last year. Look, this is objectively true. I would invite you, Google is your friend on this. Since Kirby Smart has been at Georgia, he's had 3 recruiting classes. Arguably the 3, certainly in consecutive years, the 3 best recruiting classes Georgia's ever had. And without a shadow of a doubt, the most recent class is the greatest class of all-time Georgia history. The class before that was the one that was the greatest class until 2018 happened. Mark Richt was a very good coach and a pretty good recruiter. He is not in the same universe of recruiting as Kirby Smart, and that's the reason why Georgia fans have the optimism they have right now. And frankly, it's the reason why Alabama spent the entire offseason making a lot of very hasty changes, because they see the recruiting work that Kirby Smart was doing.
Yeah, and listen, I'll follow up with Cameron Merrill on here, and he says, Lance, he developed that talent like Rick couldn't. That's my point. That's kind of my point in this entire argument is, listen, he's going to recruit at a high level. He's shown that he can recruit at a high level. But the development, and I use the development word, you guys that watch the show, I use that word all the time, because Kirby did show the ability to get those guys into the top of the draft. And I think that's what separates him right now from Mark Richt.
Last comment on this subject belongs to Bradley Bush, who's not a Georgia fan or an Alabama fan, but he makes a good point. He says Kirby and Saban are are going to be joined at the hip until Kirby beats Saban. And I don't doubt that. He's got to beat him head to head. Y'all know I like pro wrestling. To me, it's almost like a proverb of what Ric Flair used to say: to be the man, you got to beat the man. I don't deny that. That Kirby's got to slay that dragon to fully have that reputation that he wants. But it's asinine to assume that somehow it's not going to happen based on the evidence that's been sort of piling up in the other direction here over the last 12 months.
Listen, I don't know if it's going to happen. Obviously my decision making on that one kind of skews the opposite direction.
Sure.
But I've seen Nick Saban go through these things. I mean, there was the conversation back in 2008 was Nick Saban's never going to beat Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer's offensive, his offensive innovation is never going to be beat by Nick Saban's defense. It just is not. I mean, the same thing could have been said about Dabo Swinney a couple years ago. Dabo's just not where Nick Saban is. And then next year it happens. And then all of a sudden those dominoes start to fall and they do start to separate themselves as great head coaches. So I eventually think that Kirby Smart obviously will he'll have his own kind of background in those type of things. But you're right. I think there is kind of that case in point where you've got to see it happen in front of you.
Let us do item number 3 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. We love rankings, at least I do this time of year. We talked the other day about Bill Bender ranking the college football quarterbacks for the Sporting News. Athlon has sort of seen him and raised him on that idea. Bender just ranked the top 25. Athlon has ranked all 130. We obviously don't have the screen space to show you all of them, but we will show you some of the SEC names here from kind of that top group. You see Tua Tagovailoa coming in at number 2 on this list. That is just below Will Grier, who's at number 1. Drew Lock coming in at number 6, ahead of Jarrett Stidham at number 9. Nick Fitzgerald at number 10. Jake Fromm at 11, Jake Bentley at 14. These are the top 6 quarterbacks in the SEC, according to Mitch Lassen from the team over there at Athlon Sports. What do you make of this list?
I think, I hope they're right about Tua. You know what I'm saying? Like, I hope they're right. If I was making my own list, Tua Tagovailoa is probably not even in the top 20. It might not
even top 20.
It's hard, man. You know me. Show me what you can do on the field. Now, I think Tua, I think he's got all the talent in the world. I think he's going to have all the weapons in the world. And by the end of the year, the guy might be the best quarterback in the country. But to put him up there in front of some of these people that have been on the field for a couple of years, I just think it's a slap in the face to some of these guys. Now, I can't really wrap my mind around what was the one thing they looked at in this list to say this guy goes here, because it wasn't background, it wasn't on-field stats, it was just kind of judgment as you go. I mean, you put Drew Lock in front of Jarrett Stidham, you put Jake Fromm in front of Jake Bentley, Nick Fitzgerald's locked back there in the 10 spot, and Tua somehow lands in the number 2 slot. I don't know if these are projections. I don't know if this is based off talent alone. I don't know if this is based off wins you think they might get at some point. Tua is just not that high for me. I hope they're right, but he's just not that high for me.
Well, here is the defense I'd offer of Tua Tagovailoa. And obviously, for a list like this, one of the reasons why it's a good debate is anyone can establish the criteria they want to establish for why they put somebody where they put. The reason why there's an argument to be made for Tua being very high on this list is if you're going to play a game tomorrow and you could pick any quarterback you want, you're not taking 20 quarterbacks ahead of Tua Tagovailoa. You're just not. Now, if you want to say, well, it's got to be merit-based based on accomplishments, I don't know why it has to be that way. To me, this is about who you think is going to be the best this upcoming season. And yes, you didn't see a lot of him on the field, but you had the buzz from practice and you had some of those, kind of aspects that you can't completely block out of your mind, even if you want to. So I don't have a problem with Tua being ranked fairly high on this list. I really don't. I guess the issue that I'm going to make here, and I know this is going to come across as a very homerish type argument, but how are you going to rank so many quarterbacks ahead of Jake Fromm that Fromm beat head-to-head a year ago? I mean, he clobbered Nick Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald on this list coming ahead of Jake Fromm, those two teams played head-to-head. Those two quarterbacks played head-to-head, and Nick Fitzgerald limped home. I mean, to me, the same thing about Drew Lock, who obviously is, a part of the stat program there at Missouri. They're compiling a bunch of stats. On and on you go with these quarterbacks that Fromm beat head-to-head that somehow warrant being ranked by Athlon ahead of him on this list.
Yeah, I'm going to kick back on that, though, because I don't see it that way. Listen, Jake Fromm, I think he's a good quarterback. Boy, he had 2 pretty good running backs behind him. He had a great offensive line in front of him. So I'll kick back on that. Let's rewind to a year ago when this list like this came out. Where would Jalen Hurts have been ranked? Would you have ranked Jalen Hurts ahead of Jake Fromm? Absolutely not. But their freshman years were almost exactly the same. The stats were almost identical when you look at Jake Fromm and Jalen Hurts' freshman year. I don't think it's as easy as saying, boy, Jalen Hurts beat all these guys head-to-head. I wouldn't even have made that argument for Alabama last year. And so I don't think it's as easy as throwing it out there. I think that Mississippi State's defense was completely overmatched. I think that a lot of the teams they played were overmatched by Georgia's team as a whole, not just Jake Fromm.
So here's what I'll say. This may be a homerish opinion, but I come by this honestly. If you and I were going to play head-to-head, I really do think I'd take Fromm over a lot of quarterbacks who show up both in the SEC and nationally. If I had one game to win, that's the guy I want. And I completely rebuke the notion that he and Jalen Hurts had similar freshman seasons. A lot of what sort of counts as a passing yard for Hurts in that freshman season was nothing more than a Lane Kiffin jet sweep, whereas Georgia would let Fromm pass the ball in really key situations at the end of last season. They trusted him to throw the football. Now, I'm not telling you that makes him better than Will Grier or even better than Jarrett Stidham necessarily, but he's better than Nick Fitzgerald.
Nick Fitzgerald, yeah. I mean, I think he's better than Nick Fitzgerald as well. But if we're saying just because Georgia won the game against Mississippi State, I just don't see that. I think that's kind of my point. Is I'm not saying that Jalen Hurts, all the passing yards the same. I'm saying the freshman year, being a freshman quarterback that didn't start game one, leading your team to a runner-up, national runner-up. It doesn't merit all the time being at the high, that high in the list. I think that anybody that watched Jalen Hurts in his freshman year wouldn't have put him as number 2 on the list, number 1 on the list, or ahead of half those guys he played against and started against.
Cliff Nelson, going back to the Tua Tagovailoa thing, says, this is on YouTube, he had just the one half of football, and that's the kind of thing that a lot of people can't really get over. Ray Hicks says, don't think Tua was hot, think it was normal. Probably haven't seen Tua really hot yet. In other words, maybe he's got another gear to go to, and there's always that chance that what we saw from Tua in that limited window of the national championship game was a lot of really good, including the game-winning pass to Devontae Smith. There's also the interception that all of a sudden now has him labeled as a more careless quarterback than Jalen Hurts. Yeah. Given the course of a long season, maybe you see actually better decision-making from Tua show up stretched out over a longer sample size.
Yeah, and it's true. And I like 98 Sports Talk's kind of comment. He's just like Pruitt, doesn't have to be coaching history. That doesn't mean he doesn't have the coaching history. Doesn't mean he isn't a great coach. I understand that. But my point is this. If we're going to name the 130, if we're going to rank all 130, I just have trouble thinking there's not a couple more people better than Tua at this point. And that's because the track record just haven't been proven. Am I hoping that Tua goes out and wins every game next year and Alabama goes 15-0? Absolutely. I'm absolutely hoping that. But I just, track record-wise, I don't see how he's landing in the 2 slot.
We got a lot of stuff to talk about here, so I don't want to get stuck on this the entire show, but I'll ask you. You're the GM of Alabama football. You trading him for Will Grier?
No, absolutely not at this point in time.
And that's the only guy on the list ranked ahead of him. So if you're not trading him for Will Grier...
Well, it's because of age right now. It's because of age. Will Grier is on his way out of college football. Tua's got 3
good years. Okay, so take that out. You got to win a national championship this year. You trading Tua for Will Grier?
Oh, man. Boy, you're going to put my feet to the fire on this.
I know, but I am. I mean, and it's kind of funny that I'm arguing in favor of Tua on this. I'd love to be the one to tell you that, it's too limited experience to put him on this list. There is a certain extent to which I kind of agree with some of that. I don't disregard that as an argument. But, let's just put the money where your mouth is. Will Grier, who's, turned his back on his team, was suspended for a year, so much so that McElwain didn't want any more part of him anymore. Tua thought of as sort of the consummate teammate. Yeah. We've seen him throw some big-time throws. I don't think you're trading Tua for Will Grier, and that's the only quarterback, according to Athlon, that ranks ahead of him.
I don't think I am at this point either. I don't think that I could trade Will Grier for Tua Tagovailoa, but, in the reverse order decision, look at me and tell me that Jarrett Stidham at 9 doesn't deserve to be a little bit closer to Tua Tagovailoa. That's kind of the point I'm making is that I don't know if it's so much who's ahead of Tua just to Will Grier, is that, boy, there's a lot of quarterbacks on this list that are very good and have a very long track record. And it's not, I'm not, I'm a Bama guy. I'm not saying Tua's not going to be great. I mean, he could probably be end up being the best quarterback Alabama's ever had. But I don't know if I'm putting him at number 2 in May before he's ever started a game.
Mike Johnson's daddy on YouTube with one of the most vicious troll comments we've ever had here on SEC Country Live. He says, if you think about it, Florida traded Will Grier for Felipe Franks.
Boy, that's tough.
That's
man.
a tough one.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
That is a very tough one there on that. Speaking of Jeremy Pruitt, who came up a moment ago, let's do item number 4 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And Pruitt, recently speaking at one of these Rubber Chicken Spring/Summer Speaking Tour events, was relaying a message that Tennessee Athletic Director Philip Fulmer had given to him in terms of how he's going to be evaluated as the Tennessee coach. Is it true? Well, the Vols fans in attendance at this speaking engagement certainly seem to think so. Here's how Pruitt explained it.
When I took the job, I sat down with Coach Fulmer, and he looked me dead in the eye, and he said, the head coach at Tennessee is going to be judged on 3 games. Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. So when you look at that, okay, so where we at compared? That's how hard we need to work.
When we discussed Jeremy Pruitt's comments post-spring game where he called the fans, complacent and called the players quitters, we said, or at least I said, hey, maybe this is a response to Butch Jones, who's overly complimentary for sort of flowery, non-specific reasons. And, I think part of the reason why Jeremy Pruitt gets applause right there from Tennessee fans is this is also establishing a level of accountability that Butch Jones never seemed to have, always touting hollow accomplishments. When Alabama fans, or I should say, what Tennessee fans really want is to beat Alabama, to beat Georgia, to beat Florida. And now Jones ultimately did get that done against Florida, and had a couple wins against UGA, but not enough rivalry wins, and certainly not ever beating the Alabama Crimson Tide. But when you fast forward to 2018, what's interesting about this, Mike, is Tennessee's going to be a huge underdog to Alabama and going to be a pretty significant underdog to Georgia. The third team that he mentions there is Florida. You want to talk about a knockdown drag-out for both programs. Both these programs, you can't even put into words just how much of an important game. Yep. Tennessee-Florida, which has always been a pretty good rivalry going back to the early 90s, what a crucial game this is for both these teams.
Yeah, you want to talk about two fan bases that are going to be scratching and clawing, buddy. Game week, Tennessee-Florida. I mean, I'm so excited about that showdown. And you remember back, what was Butch Jones? Probably 1-4 against Florida, and the one game he won was an incredible comeback by Tennessee at home there in Neyland Stadium. So, it's such a kind of establishing a hierarchy almost, if you will, in the SEC East, isn't it? It's like we both have new coaches. We both have teams we think are up and coming. We're both really getting on the recruiting trail. Who can jump out ahead in that rivalry? It's going to be incredible to watch. And I'll tell you this much. If I'm judging right now, they're an underdog to Florida as well. You said huge to Bama, significant to Georgia, and I think they're an underdog to Florida as well, just because I think the top-tier talent Florida
Game's back in Knoxville this year.
I think that evens it a little bit, but I'm just telling you with the top of the lineup, and I've talked about the depth chart down at Florida, with the top of the lineup at Florida, I'm having to think that they're going to be a favorite against Tennessee right now. So I think that Fulmer's words are very fair, but do I think I expect it in year one for them all of a sudden to start bouncing back against their rivalries? Absolutely not. I think that's unfair.
Yeah, listen, I can't even have you, and I appreciate the applause line, and I appreciate the fact that Jeremy Pruitt eventually maybe wants to be judged in these rivalry games, but for 2018, I can't have you talk about Alabama, and I can't have you talk about Georgia. Georgia beat you 41-0 in your own stadium last year. Don't even use that school's name in your mouth until you build a little more of a track record here. Alabama the same way. It was a humiliation for Tennessee in Tuscaloosa with Golden doing what he did.
39.5-point spread covered.
Yeah, ugly game there. So it'd be like saying, hey, I want you to judge me about whether or not I'm elected president. We're a long way away from something like that even being relevant. But Florida, that's a pretty reasonable goal. And in year one, it's not too much to say, Jeremy Pruitt of Tennessee, go out and beat Florida and do something. Give me something to be proud of.
Boy, Bull Molinari is throwing hammers in the YouTube comment section right now. He said, who cares about this train wreck of a program? 4 wins, 4-month coaching search, and 4 athletic department firings. That kind of tells you the story of how hungry, though, for me, Tennessee fans are going to be in this game, right? Because I don't think that Tennessee fans reasonably expect them to go out in year one and beat Alabama. It hasn't happened in, what is it, going on 12 years right now? I don't think they reasonably expect them to go out and beat UGA just yet. But I do think there is a significant amount of Tennessee fans that look at Florida and think they are ripe for the taking. Think that Dan Mullen, in year one on the job, we need to go establish that hierarchy. And I don't think it's quite fair yet for Jeremy Pruitt to be kind of judged based on that. And I look at the schedule, and we're going to get into this later on the show.
Yeah.
There's not going to be a lot of easy wins, I think, for Tennessee this year.
Yeah, we got to significantly pick up the pace, too, by the way. I think I'm looking at my phone so much today, I'm not seeing the clock enough. Yeah. We are well behind our scheduled pace here at the moment. Let me do item number 5. Yeah, I agree with you on that. Let me do item number 5 here on our SEC Country Live First in 10 list. And I'm not proud of this, but I do enjoy a good, online beef. I like wars of words back and forth. I don't generally like to be a part of them. For those of you that see me on social media, A, I don't tweet very much, period, and B, certainly don't tweet anything negative towards anybody. I like it when other folks go back and forth with each other. You had the former Alabama quarterback, SEC Network analyst Greg McElroy saying that Auburn would have dusted UCF had they played for a real in a college football playoff instead of a relatively meaningless Peach Bowl game. And Mackenzie Milton, the UCF quarterback, was not happy about that kind of firing back at Greg McElroy. And it was captured by a UCF writer on Twitter here, a screen grab, eventually deleted by Mackenzie Milton. You see on the screen there what McElroy said, and then you see Mackenzie Milton as captured by Jason Beatty on social media. Your career was dust, buddy. Essentially saying a national championship quarterback, a guy that played with you.
Yeah. And he tags Greg McElroy.
Yeah,
he's not just putting out like this, boy. I'm going to put out this vague tweet. Like, tags him and it goes right after him, and it's tough. It is tough because I think Greg gets that a lot. And I played with Greg. I was friends with Greg back in college. I haven't spoken to Greg in some time, but I did kind of it was kind of that, man. It really stinks that you go down that road for Mackenzie Milton, because I know Greg has a lot of respect for him.
Yeah, but I mean, what's he not supposed to give his opinion? I mean, that's what you're supposed to do.
No.
I mean, look, this is more of UCF just finding a way to somewhat stay, relatively relevant in the discussion by this kind of stuff. But I don't know. I mean, let me let you hear Greg McElroy, who, after seeing the comment from Mackenzie Milton, here's what he said back in response to that on his own Sirius XM radio show. Here is Greg McElroy's response here.
I have a lot of respect for UCF. I especially have a lot of respect for Mackenzie Milton. As you know, he's been one of my favorite quarterbacks for the last couple of years. I think he's sensational, and if he wants to take this personal, that's fine. I'm not going to hold it against him whatsoever. I don't blame him for taking it personal whatsoever. He's an outstanding player and is a big reason why UCF was even in this conversation last year. But I'm very much looking forward to watching this team continue. I mean that. And I don't think that they're necessarily national championship contenders, but they're still going to be among the elite teams in the group of 5, or at least that's what we can all hope.
Bo Molinari on YouTube says, is this Mackenzie Milton beefing down with Greg McElroy? I actually don't think so. Former Alabama quarterback, still of a greater stature than UCF quarterback here, so this is not a beef down situation.
I would ask the question in the opposite direction. Is this Greg McElroy beefing down with...
Well, he's got to respond. Once he calls him out and saying your career is trash,
that's true.
You got to respond here. I'm going to give McElroy some credit in the fact that he doesn't really back down off this. He sort of sticks with his initial comment. I did like what one of our SEC country writers said about this Auburn fans in the tough position here, because they love nothing more than to support the guy who said the former Alabama quarterback was trash, and yet they can't because, in this case, McElroy got in trouble for defending them. Yeah. If you're an Auburn fan, you're in a tough spot on this.
I think you definitely are. And I'd love to hear from Auburn fans in the comment section, too, because you and I were wondering aloud about this. If you're an Auburn fan, what direction do you go on this, or you just sit back and kind of eat the popcorn and say, boy, this is an interesting topic of conversation if you're Greg McElroy and Mackenzie Milton. By the way, Mackenzie Milton, I don't know if you guys realize, not a bad quarterback. That ranking we just showed, I'm pretty sure he landed in the top 10 himself.
But these guys that have these thin skins, I mean, listen, Mackenzie Milton, his last good moment was his last good moment. Okay, I mean, we're not hearing a word from UCF.
Yeah. By the way, Scott Frost came out last week and said that Bama was the national champion anyway. So if you want to beef with somebody, then go after your own old head.
And if you're an Auburn fan, you want to weigh in on this, you can do so on the laptop, on the phone. Send us a smoke signal.
Twitter's somewhere around there.
Yeah, we'll use all these devices to try to keep up with you. If you're just joining us, had a little bit of an issue with the Facebook comments. You can watch the show just fine. The Facebook comments not showing up. Even some of you, I think, have noticed that on your own device there. So we'll kind of keep this going and have a fun conversation with you on that. For now, let's do item number 7 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And an interesting scenario facing Arkansas coming up for 2018. And this is something that you and I have talked about before, although it's been a few months. Did that jump ahead of something? Oh, my gosh. Boy, you're talking about what is wrong with me? I think the toggling on all the screens is just a mess here. Let me do item number 6. I should be on item number 7, but let me do item number 6 instead, because this is a pretty important thing to discuss. We started the show by talking about the possibility that Joe Burrow ends up at LSU. Andy Staples is reporting that the Tigers have permission to speak to him. Land of 10 is reporting that LSU is one of the finalists, along with Florida and Nebraska. But Florida, who we mentioned yesterday as being in the mix here, you're not really getting more developments on this from the Florida end, because Dan Mullen, the Florida boy, it's a rough afternoon for the kid here. Dan Mullen, who spoke at another one of these rubber chicken events last night in Fort Lauderdale, once again pressed on the issue of Joe Burrow, did not offer much more in regard to the subject. Here is what he said, that things really haven't changed. One of the things we do is we evaluate everybody that may transfer as grad transfers. We try to look and say, hey, what's the need? How do they fit our program? Are they a 1-year or a 2-year transfer? That's a big deal too, because you're looking short-term, long-term, so it really hasn't changed for us. This is Dan Mullen not wanting to say, even after Joe Burrow has made it official that he is transferring, Mullen not going on the record about him yet, which leads me to believe that Mullen doesn't yet know which way he's going. If Mullen knows this young man's a Florida lean, I think he admits that he's had the contact. He admits that this is a possibility. But right now, the ball, in terms of decision-making, is still in Burrow's court. That's why I believe you get the non-committal answer from Dan Mullen right there.
I absolutely agree. And I think that Dan Mullen actually kind of circled back around on himself. He says, is he a 1 year or a two-year graduate transfer? You know, are we talking short-term or long-term? Joe Burrow's is a 2-year graduate transfer, right? I mean, he kind of circles back on himself. And Joe Burrow's is a 2-year graduate transfer. That's the only reason that I have been in favor of this, is because he does have 2 years down there at Florida, and he's not going to have to spend a ton of time learning the system. And so I think this is Dan Mullen just playing it close. You know, I think he's trying not to get out in front of everything. He understands that this guy probably immediately upgrades your quarterback situation, but you don't need the bad look. You don't need the bad look if you're Florida saying, boy, we went after this guy and he spurred us for LSU or he spurred us for somewhere else.
Yeah, it is fair to say that Mullen seems, at least publicly, to be showing more confidence in his quarterbacks than LSU is. Now, we haven't heard officially from Orgeron on this, but, I mean, somebody leaked something to Sports Illustrated. Otherwise, Andy Staples wouldn't have had the juice to report that LSU had been granted permission to speak to him there. So if this doesn't work out for Florida with Joe Burrow, and I think it needs to, I think Florida's a bad football team if they don't have him, at least Mullen saves face with his own quarterbacks here.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that that's probably the route that every kind of coaching staff wishes, every fan base wishes their coaching staff would take, is that you don't need that bad look. We talk about all the time trending in the right direction. Why not play this close to the vest? And why not say, hey, we're going to kick around the time? Because the bottom line is, I'm sure Dan Mullen still has Urban Meyer's phone number, and he can get all the intel and insight he needs. He doesn't have to make this public.
On Facebook, Corey Tester says, BA, I'm rolling. You need to stay out of the brandy under your desk if you're just joining us. I have butchered a few things here as of late, including a few names, which is not all that unusual. I also almost skipped a topic a moment ago. I'm going to blame this on the Facebook hiccup, but other folks thinking I've been drinking on the job here, which, listen, I'd love nothing more than be able to be having fun in that regard. There's some YouTube comments much the same way where people are kind of saying, Teresa Lowry says something along those lines. Teresa Lowry says, I love you, BA. There's nothing wrong with a good flask. If only the explanation for my blunders were that much fun.
Yeah, 98 Sports Talk asked me if you had a bottle hidden behind that chair, and I checked back there, nothing going on. So we don't have that excuse.
So, listen, I'd love nothing more than for this show to be that much of a party. I'm not quite sure we're having quite that much fun. Nonetheless, let me do item number 7 now here on our SEC Country Live First in 10 list. And speaking of the Arkansas Razorbacks, Eric Boland, who's our writer covering Arkansas for SEC Country, laying out a pretty significant scenario here for Arkansas this upcoming season, and it involves what at one point in time looked like might be a star running back in Devwah Whaley, but last season that superstar status kind of took a little bit of a ding, maybe a bit of a dent. Here's what Eric Boland wrote: that Devwah Whaley's sophomore season could be summed up in one word. That's disappointment, going back to 2017. Boland explains that in 2016, Whaley as a freshman was excellent, had 602 yards on 110 carries in a limited role. He spent the season as lieutenant to the leading rusher in the SEC in the regular season. Then it was all laid on a plate for Whaley to capitalize on that for next year, and he didn't collect on it, getting just 559 yards on 125 carries in 2017. Whatever happened in 2017 needs to be proven a fluke, because if it turns out 2016 was the fluke, that D word is going to turn into a B word, bust. Eric Boland suggesting that one of the elite recruits near the end of the Brett Bielema era could end up being a bust for Arkansas here. Those are harsh words, but I'm not sure they're wrong.
I'm not sure they're wrong either, but I'm not ready to lay this on Devwah Whaley right now. I mean, to think of the hand that he was dealt last year, and remember back to Brett Bielema coming out and talking about his offensive line. I mean, I know that Arkansas fans remember this. Brett Bielema comes out after one of their games and says, boy, to be honest with you, we missed on a couple of those guys, and it's really put us behind the 8 ball for the last couple of years. The offensive line has not been good. The team hasn't been good. It's to put this all on Devwah Whaley and say, bust or, disappointment, I think that's unfair. I mean, you had Raleigh Williams, who was supposed to be the feature back going into last year, and this guy hurts his neck and gets on the shelf, has to end his career, and then all of a sudden Devwah Whaley's the guy. You bring in a transfer and David Williams from South Carolina to try to help him out. I'm not ready to blame Devwah Whaley for all the bad things that are happening in Arkansas. He needs a ton of talent around him. I think that Chad Morris will open things up offensively, and I think Devwah Whaley will get a chance to prove himself.
On YouTube, 98 Sports Talk says, how are we going to blame one guy when it was the whole team that was awful? I think a lot of Arkansas fans, though, would single out Devwah Whaley as not capitalizing on everything that he should have been able to there. But Mon Molinari kind of echoing the same thing on YouTube, saying, I thought you said the whole team was a bust, just the running back. And if you want to look at 2018, and this is actually a subject that's come up here a couple times, and I've made a similar point every time it comes up, and I'm going to stick by this. There are not enough elite athletes on this Arkansas roster right now. It's too limited of a roster to be writing off anyone who has some real athletic credentials, and Devwah Whaley does. I mean, he looks the part. If you saw him getting off the bus, you'd think he's one of the best players in the team. You can't afford to have that guy sitting on the shelf not contributing. So I know there's some candidates to have some success running the football for Arkansas this season, and maybe some hope that maybe Chad Morris gets more out of the Arkansas offensive line than what happened for the Hogs after Sam Pittman left to go to Georgia. But you can't have Whaley being dead weight. You've got to have him being a major contributor. Otherwise, the Chad Morris era is going to get off to a really slow start.
And I agree with you there. I mean, you haven't had a ton of big-time recruiting wins. And so if Devwah Whaley's one of those guys, you've got to point at him as really being an anchor of the football team. And I think that's where he kind of comes from when he's writing this article, saying, listen, we don't have talent everywhere, but the places we do have talent definitely need to step up to the plate, and I think that's what Aaron Boland's talking about.
How about this from Dwayne Wark on Facebook, who makes an interesting point that says Arkansas is and was bad, still beat Ole Miss, overtime with Texas A&M, smoked Florida the year before, and an equal record and better conference record than Tennessee. So essentially saying, as bad as Devwah Whaley may have looked, and as much criticism as Arkansas may be taking the comment section, that things at Arkansas aren't really all that much worse than some of the other spots in the SEC, including Tennessee.
I have to tend to agree with them. I mean, if you do go out and get that A&M win last year, I mean, there's so many what-ifs for that Arkansas program, too, because they played such a different big boy, big offensive line kind of brand of spread football. It wasn't really downhill, like pro style of offense, but you spread them out and did try to run the football. So there were some opportunities there. I mean, let's not act like Brett Bielema was a terrible football coach. Did it end terribly? Probably so, but I think the in-game management and development, he was probably better than people give him credit for. Just couldn't recruit at a very high level.
Cliff Nelson says desperate coaches point the finger at others, responsible coaches point the finger at themselves, and in this case, it's not the coaches blaming Devwah Whaley. In this case, it's a rider, but I think it is probably fair to say that Whaley, if I'm guessing here, and I'm no former coach, no former scout, but Whaley probably fits the more of the Brett Bielema play calling mold than what spread coach Chad Morris is probably looking for from a running back, or am I wrong about that?
Maybe so. I'm not sure, because I'd be lying to you if I said I sat down and watched Chad Morris's film on what his spread offense is going to be. But I think knowing what I know and seeing from from some of the teams that have picked apart from that, the Gus Malzahn's, the Clemsons under Dabo that do have a little bit of that Chad Morris style, I think there's room for a bigger guy. I think that you find that Cam Petway type of role, if you will, in that offense. I think that you have to have one of those guys if you're going to be successful in those short down situations.
Let me do item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And a moment ago in our comment section, Rick Keene, who's a great Florida fan and a terrific commenter for us every day, was talking about the notion of Florida taking a graduate transfer quarterback, saying that, I don't have the quote right in front of me now, but essentially saying that Florida's a better program than that. They don't take cast-offs. They're not like a last-chance university for transfers. A guy that's not good enough to start at Ohio State shouldn't be good enough for Florida. That's essentially what Rick Keene said. But there are at least some opinions out there in the world of college football that maybe push back on that Florida fan's comment here. Here's the rest of the list from Athlon Sports in terms of where quarterbacks rank in the SEC here for 2018, and look at the current starter for Florida, all the way down at 94th on the list, ahead of just Terry Wilson from Kentucky in the SEC, behind Cole Kelly and even Miles Brennan, Keller Christ, who may or may not win that starting job at Tennessee, Nick Starkel, who's in a battle with Kellen Mond, Jordan Ta'amu, and then Kyle Shermer from Vanderbilt. I mean, to me, what jumps out on this list is Felipe Franks at 94th on it.
Yeah, boy, that's tough. I mean, you ever heard the saying that it's better for people to think you're an idiot than to open your mouth and prove it?
Yeah.
I guess it's evidently, it's better for people to think you stink than to get on the field and prove it that you stink. You know what I mean? We haven't even seen, Keller Christ at UT, this guy's not even on campus yet.
That's a really interesting point.
I mean, it's unbelievable. Cole Kelly, I'm not even sure is going to be the starter for Arkansas. A lot of people think Connor Nolan or Stephen Jones or somebody coming in might take that job from him. I love where Jordan Ta'amu's at, but you're right. The thing that jumps out to me is just how far down Felipe Franks is at 90. I mean, can you really look at that and tell me that there are 93 quarterbacks better than him?
Tyler Mann asked a great question. Where would Joe Burrow be on this list if he landed at LSU or Florida? Can I see it one more time where Brennan is in the list and where Felipe Franks is in the list? I mean, is Burrow better than 94th best quarterback in the country?
I don't think there's any doubt. From the pieces that I've seen in Joe Burrow's, and it's admittedly not a ton, but from seeing him perform in that Ohio spring game where he was very accurate, he was precise, he was the timing was there with a lot of his plays. I don't know if you move him into the top 15 or top 20, but I would move Jordan Ta'amu up, and I'd put Joe Burrow's right inside that top 30 right now, if not a little bit higher than that.
Wait, in the entire country?
In the entire country, absolutely.
No, that doesn't make any sense. A minute ago, you said you couldn't put Tua Tagovailoa in the top 20.
But if we're doing that,
Joe Burrow hadn't played a minute.
My point, I'm trying to make the point that Felipe Franks should not be this far down the list because people in front of him have not showed up there. So if that's what we're doing on this list, and we're putting guys up at the top, and based off what they could be, then I think Joe Burrows would belong up there.
I'm going to say the same thing we said before about the Tua Tagovailoa deal. There are not very many quarterbacks you're trading Tua for. At the same time, if you want Felipe Franks, I'll take a quarterback at random. And I'm a point spread favorite over you.
Yeah, it's tough to argue against that. And Felipe Franks, I can't help but feel like this guy hasn't been dealt a bad hand, though. I mean, I really can't. I don't put all this on Felipe Franks. I look at what the offense has been, the first couple of years under Jim McElwain. Felipe Franks, if you thought he was going to give you all the answers last year, then you were sadly mistaken yourself. I don't think you can put the disarray that was Florida's offense last year solely on Felipe Franks. I just don't think you can.
We agree that list, and not that it's the Bible, but we take it somewhat seriously because smart people are compiling it, at least reflects some opinion out there. That list is why Dan Mullen better be trying to bring in a transfer quarterback, even if publicly he's pretending like he's not.
Well, I think what's interesting about this list is they only ranked projected starters, right? They only ranked who they thought was going to be the projected starter because, I mean, you can make the case that there is 5 backups in the SEC that might be better than Felipe Franks.
That's a really good point.
I mean, Keaton Thompson, Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts. I mean, you can keep going down the list. And I think, honestly, if I'm looking at the list, Jordan Ta'amu is probably higher up than me. I mean, he just is. I mean, a lot of people have not talked about Shea Patterson leaving, and that's because Jordan Ta'amu is still at Ole Miss, and he is very good.
All right, item number 9 on our SEC Country Life First and 10 list. Speaking of Greg McElroy, who mentioned before, he recently spoke to SEC Country about a different subject, the expectations at Tennessee. And based on McElroy's perception of those expectations, maybe a little too high right now, a bit of an issue. Yeah. Here's what McElroy told SEC Country. I think Tennessee is the toughest situation comparing it to all the other new coaches in the SEC because their expectations are the highest. I mean, if Chad Morris goes in there and goes 6-6 a couple of times, he means at Arkansas fans aren't going to be losing their minds. But if Jeremy Pruitt goes in there and goes 6-6, he's going to have to answer some tough questions. So Tennessee fans, they have high expectations, and they should. I think Jeremy Pruitt has high expectations for himself and for the program. But I don't know if the expectations are attainable right now. I know Tennessee guys that are sitting here, I've gone on their shows. They're telling me, well, 8 wins, we've got to get 8 wins this year. I'm like, where? How are you going to get them? If you look at their schedule, I think 6 wins would be a heck of a year. I really do, given the turnover. So I just think the Tennessee job is probably the most difficult right now of the first-year SEC coaches because of the expectations of the fan base and just how badly they want to build a winner. Do you agree with Greg McElroy about that?
I agree 100% with what he's talking about right here. And I think that really you look at first-year head coaches, you look at turnover, and I think a lot of people, especially at a place like Tennessee, you blindly throw 8 wins at it, don't you? I mean, I think you just, boy, we're at a place like Tennessee, we should be able to win 8 games. And then I think you're going to look at that schedule, and I think you're going to be underdogs against West Virginia. I think you're going to be underdog against Florida, I mentioned earlier, Georgia, Auburn, Bama, South Carolina. You might be an underdog against Missouri, and heck, you might even be an underdog against Vandy by the time you get to the end of the year. So I think 6 wins, I agree with Greg 100%. 6 wins at Tennessee this year should be considered a good year. They can get to 7, then Jeremy Pruitt is definitely, trending in the right direction.
Arkansas Motorcycle Rides on YouTube says Tennessee's got a chance to get 2 SEC wins this season, Arkansas and Vanderbilt. Teresa Lowry, who's a good Tennessee fan on YouTube, says, give Pruitt a break this year. He's got to have a chance to fix where we're at. That's the reasonable response. I'm sure Teresa hopes a lot of Vols fans join her in that. But the fact of the matter is, patience is not a finite resource here. A lot of Tennessee fans have used up their patience on Butch Jones and on Derek Dooley before that. They just don't have a lot of patience left to give. There is a restlessness among Tennessee fans that makes Pruitt's job tougher. From that standpoint, I agree with Greg McElroy. But you can't just sort of regenerate patience out of thin air. You can't just be granted it just because you want it. Tennessee fans are tired. They are, to use a cliche, they are sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah, I agree with that to an extent. I think that a lot of Tennessee fans, if you ask them, boy, when are we going to have to stop doing these rebuilding jobs? When am I going to stop being sold on, boy, this is a rebuilding effort? And so, but I think for the most part, Tennessee fans understand where they're at. You can look at the roster and see what you have on the offensive line, what you have on the defensive line, what you have in terms of pass rushers, what you have in the secondary. And they're not dumb. They understand that this is going to take some time for Jeremy Pruitt to get in. Jeremy Pruitt was hired as a recruiter to remake this roster. Give him some time to do that.
All right, item number 10 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I am happy to report that the crime of the offseason has been solved. The 2017 Butkus Award winner, Roquan Smith, left some of his items, personal belongings, including some of the memorabilia from his final season at UGA in his car. They were stolen in Athens, but recovered here, as reported by the Somerville News. We'll show you the picture there from their website. Here is police finding the items because a young man essentially, his fingerprint was left in the car. He confessed the crime. You see Roquan's jerseys, the helmet, the bag there, stuff like this. All of this has been returned. I guess the one thing that maybe still be missing is the tablet that the Chicago Bears gave him.
So good.
That may be gone forever, but at least to get the memorabilia back. And apparently Roquan's feeling pretty good about it because he offered this by way of thank you.
Good morning. I would personally like to thank everyone for their kind words and prayers. As Athens Clarke County Police Department worked very hard to identify the individual responsible for this. It was definitely huge. I would also like to thank the many of you that spread the information over various social media outlets. Due to the prompt attention by the Athens Clarke County Police Department, I was able to recover most of my items as well as the individual being identified. Just like to thank you guys so much.
Why is he being so serious?
Yeah.
I mean, he got his stuff back. How about a smile?
I think that he's probably aware that he's going to have to call that head coach from the Bears and say, you know what, that one didn't show back up.
Oh, the memorabilia is worth a lot more than the tablet is. Plus, listen, those Bears defenses ain't that tricky. You've been watching them the last couple of years. They ain't got that many secrets on that tablet.
It's definitely worth more to Roquan, but I don't know in the long run that Chicago Bears tablet is not worth a little bit more than those jerseys.
I'm sure it's you're crazy, man. That's a college football playoff jersey.
That's an NFL playbook that they're going to have to go into next season and think about the fact that there is a playbook floating around on the open market, maybe on YouTube somewhere, on eBay somewhere. You know, that's a tough one to swallow.
Maybe they should change things up. How about that? Because what they were running wasn't working all that well as it is. But good to know that Roquan's got his stuff back. We're happy about that, and great job by the police involved here. All right, we're always looking to close the show out the same way every day. We're always looking for our champions of life, and today it does come from the world of college football, and maybe you file this one under the category of I'm surprised this kind of thing doesn't happen more often. Yeah. A recruit from like up in the Midwest goes on Twitter and brags about getting his name is Jake Karczynski. He brags about getting his 14th offer from the University of Iowa. #Swarm19. Well, Jim Hoffer, who I guess is an Iowa State coach, thinks he's DMing one of these recruiting rivals who are tagging this tweet, accidentally doing a public Twitter message saying, well, that's okay. Have seen him competitively and was underwhelmed, as you know. Man. So recruits, if you ever wonder what coaches are saying about you behind your back when they're not giving you, all this love on social media, that's an example of that. Credit to College Football Reddit who found
I couldn't remember the name, but you remember last year when we talked about the Texas A&M recruit that was like Nick Starkel's not very good.
Yeah.
I can't remember who that was, but somebody like blasted his DMs and took a screenshot and posted it.
Well, that was the kid that landed at Ohio State, right? The other quarterback that landed there. Well, I'm not blanking. It's Tate Martell, right?
Martell, yeah.
I think it was Tate Martell. Wasn't that Tate Martell?
I think so.
Hopefully I'm not putting him out there for something he didn't do, but I think that was
That's what it reminded me of. That's the first thing that popped in my head. That's bad luck.
Yeah, it's a bad luck right there. You may have to go back to the drawing board on that recruit. Anyway, check out the podcast. It's up for you right after the show on all the various podcast channels. Also share your show with the friends on video. Hopefully tomorrow the Facebook comments will be back working and I won't be juggling quite so many balls over here. But nonetheless, we appreciate you being a part of the program every single day. We'll see you again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for another episode of SEC Country Live.